as a one example, I've been meeting with the shelter operators, and one of our providers indicated that in December and January they turned away 183 unique families from their family shelter.
That's the dilemma that's facing the city of Hamilton right now, and it's housing, it's homelessness. And by the way, we're going to talk about tent cities a little bit later on, but it's an offshoot of what's going on here. That, of course, was Angela Burton, who's the manager of Healthy and Safe Communities. A lot of it comes down to the fact that, the worst days of the pandemic, the federal and provincial governments, of course, kicked in money for housing, and that we're not getting that anymore. That's about $22 million shortfall. And the city is going to be on the hook to try to make up that difference. Or I should say you and I as taxpayers. Joining us to talk about this and some other interesting local things happening around, always a pleasure to welcome John Best back. John, of course, is the publisher of the Bay Observer covering local politics. John, thanks so much for the time. Good to have you with us again.
Yeah, great to be with you, Bill.
When we talked about the city of Hamilton finalizing their budget process, and it looks like we're going to have in the neighborhood of 6%, a little bit more than that, I guess, in some areas. And you figure this is an outrageous increase, but this is one of the pressures that these guys are facing right now. The money that usually is or was actually on the table for the last couple of years is gone right now, and it's, I guess, kind of an ugly way of downloading this responsibility back onto taxpayers.
Yeah, it is, and very disheartening when you pick up the paper today and find out that of the emergency money that the federal government put out, and in fairness to them, they had to get it out quickly or it wouldn't have been effective. But something like $4.5 billion is wasted, went to people that weren't eligible, and then you look at the struggle these municipalities are having right now. That was quite a presentation from Angela Burton. I followed it on the day she made her presentation and talked about the affordable or the emergency housing and shelter system on the verge of collapse. And in order to get it stabilized, she talked about needing between 11 and 22 million. So it's a grim picture, Bill. And I did notice that other communities are experiencing it as well. But this is one of those instances where the misery loves company argument really doesn't work. The fact that Toronto is looking at a 7% tax increase and some of these other communities it really doesn't help the folks here in Hamilton who, generally it's acknowledged that people in Hamilton have a little less ability to handle these kind of increases.
But don't come knocking on the province's door. That's the message I think that everybody got from Queen's Park over the last little while. That they've got their own challenges, et cetera, and probably an awful lot of other things going on. We just on the news just heard about the latest from the OPP. It looks like they're not going to be investigating Doug Ford and the Greenbelt. What they're looking for, John, as I understand it, they want a smoking gun. In other words, they're not going to begin an investigation, essentially, I guess, until somebody comes forward and said, yeah, that's what happened. I paid for my ability to sit at that table, and I got paid, and I'm one of the people who benefit from that. And if that's what they're waiting for, don't hold your breath, because I don't think that's going to happen, do you?
No, but in fairness to the police, they're not Karnak the magician either. They do need evidence, and it doesn't necessarily mean somebody has to come forward and confess. There's all kinds of opportunity for whistleblowers.
Sure.
But the reality is, and I think we kind of touched on this earlier. It's more the kind of shady gray area of politics and connections and friendships and associations. So it's highly unlikely anybody went into a room, shut the door, and said, okay, here's the deal. We're going to do this, and in exchange for that. It's not like that. During the election and well in advance of the election, the government gave every hint that they were looking at really changing the whole housing picture, and that was going to include expanding urban boundaries. Certainly here in Hamilton, we were told quite clearly that this boundary freeze that the council had imposed was probably not going to last. And it was a similar message right around the GTA. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes, but I think we're a long way away from somebody being helped into the backseat of a police car.
Exactly. And so we'll carry on The solicitor is going to be looking at all this sort of stuff. The Auditor General is doing an investigation, but again, there's no legal requirement. I mean, she can, publish a whole series of numbers that say, yeah, this, stinks to high heavens, but nobody's going to lay any charges until there's actually some proof, and I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. But I guess it's a stretch of people's ability to be able to comprehend and digest this stuff when you hear the government say nothing going on here. Yeah, they all went to the wedding and to the stag and doe, but nobody talked business. Of course, John, they all talk business when they go to those sorts of things. It may not be the whole topic of conversation over the 3 or 4 hours that they're there, but of course stuff like that comes up when you have politicians and you have people with a common interest.
Well, the optics are terrible, no matter whether a technical illegality has taken place. The optics just look bad. You get into this bubble mentality, I guess. Somebody with first year PR training would have been able to put their hand up and saying, going to all these rich people and asking them to donate, I forget what it was, $150 to a stag and doe. Has anybody considered the optics of it? It's shocking that somebody wouldn't have had that discussion, but inside these bubbles, I think people just get into a rah-rah mentality and they lose perspective completely. The optics of something like that are just undefensible. And so here we are. This is going to drag on for months, possibly, depending on these various investigations that are taking place. We're probably still going to be looking at this well into the summer and fall. And there may actually be something that can be identified as an out-and-out violation. But even if it isn't, you've just got this swirling cloud of smoke, and it just gets in the way of what government's business really should be.
Mm-hmm. With John Best from the Bay Observer, I want to touch on a story that you published in the Bay Observer just a couple of days ago, and this is something you've been following for years now, and of course that's the Hamilton Waterfront Trust. There have been investigations, there have been accusations made about how effective it is, where they're getting their money from, et cetera, et cetera. They had another meeting. I'm sure some people listening right now say, does that still exist? I thought they broke that thing up. They haven't. Doesn't look like they're going to for any time soon. And I know there's some new faces there because there were some new faces on council. But is this, to quote the old Who song, is this meet the new boss, same as the old boss situation?
So far it is, Bill. It's unbelievable, really. You've got 5 new members. They're all members of council. 4 new members, sorry. And I don't see any difference between the way these Waterfront Trust meetings are being conducted to the way they were conducted before. They made some reference to a KPMG report that it sounded, this is kind of like in Peking where they used to look at the wall art and try and figure out what the government was doing. But it appears there is a consultant report that's going to be, I'm not sure whether it's coming to the Waterfront Trust or whether it's coming to council, but it apparently deals with the future of this organization. And apparently what it deals with is how they can wind the thing down and transfer its activities to the city of Hamilton. Very interesting that they're still dealing with it as an in-camera item. So much has been leaked about where this organization is headed. It's hard to imagine what could be justified. The executive director, Mr. Plessel, he's moved on. It was announced at the meeting that the acting executive director is done at the end of April. So it really sounds like an organization that is going through transition, but still in camera, still dealing with it in such a murky way. Hard to understand why some of these new counselors would even attach themselves to an organization that really has has embroiled itself in questionable reputation, largely due to its secrecy.
Well, there's that, and the obvious question is, why do they even exist? I mean, just the 10-second history on this for people who may not be aware. This waterfront trust was established way back when the federal government and the city of Hamilton settled out of court on some of the contentious issues about harbor rights, et cetera, and water rights. And there's a huge chunk of cash that went to the city. And these guys were supposed to oversee how that goes. The money's long gone, John. It was gone years and years ago. So you have to wonder, why do these guys even exist now?
Well, typically a trust, the reason you use the word trust is because it's operating a trust fund. Yeah. They ran out of trust money at least a decade ago, and they've been existing pretty much entirely on make-work projects that the city gave them, which in itself was questionable because essentially what they did was act as a go-between between the city and the contractors that were hired to do a variety of construction jobs. But then they tacked on a 10% administration fee that wouldn't have existed if the city itself had put out those contracts. So it's really been artificial life support for about 10 years. Council simply refused to deal with this. We've gone through numerous elections, and council simply would not deal with it. And now we've had a change election. We got a whole bunch of new councilors. I think they're dealing with it to give them the benefit of the doubt. But if you watch that meeting last week, they elected a whole new board of directors, a chairman, a vice chairman, treasurer. It felt like business as usual, but you still had this hanging over the head, the idea that maybe it's going to wind down this year. It certainly, there's no justification for it existing as a separate organization. Without the city's support, it's been effectively bankrupt for almost 10 years. And, it's time to put a fork in it.
I hope so. It couldn't happen soon enough. John, thanks for following the story. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Bill.
John Best from the Bay Observer.